Hello and welcome back to Techweek TV, brought to you by Callaghan Innovation. Thank you so much for tuning in online from around the country. My name is Jake Miller. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Unfiltered, and it's a huge honour to be here today in Christchurch to present this panel on real-world AI in 2019, practical insights from New Zealand businesses. We're joined today by some of the country's leading specialists in the world of AI, people achieving some really remarkable things. And I'm so excited to understand more insights about where this world is going. You know, it's one of the hottest topics in the world right now. So there's so much we can learn from the panel who joined me today. So thank you guys so much for taking the time and for being here. To kick this off, I just thought we'd just quickly go through and just introduce ourselves, what we do, how we fit into this world, and maybe why AI is something we're passionate about. So starting with you, Ernestine.
Cool. So hi there, my name's Ernestine Walsh. I am a data scientist, and something I'm passionate about is making sure that the skills that I've learned can be put to good use.
Thank you. What about you, Isaac?
Hi there, yes, I'm Isaac Wilson. I'm the founder of TechSpirit, one of the leading text analytics tools in New Zealand. I'm really passionate about how we can use data that's very unstructured and often pretty unusable and turn into insights that organisations can take and make very informed decisions from.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Tony Greaves. I'm an R&D contractor and consultant working in the broad AI space. I've a long background in a field known as chemometrics, which probably most people haven't heard of, but it's the extraction of information from chemical systems by data-driven means. And we were back, employing neural nets and things like that in the 1990s to do this. Nowadays, working on things like automated discovery from scientific literature.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And Ben?
Thanks, Jake. So my name's Ben Reid. I'm the Executive Director of the AI Forum of New Zealand. So we're the organisation, part of the New Zealand Tech Alliance, which brings together AI industry, tech firms, government, and also the universities, so a lot of the researchers around the country, to really drive New Zealand's capability in AI and machine learning and all the other technologies we're talking about today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time again. And, today, just in terms of the format of this presentation, for those watching at home, we're going to have a few PowerPoint presentations that our guests are going to take us through. Then we're going to sort of enter into a larger discussion about AI and the future of machine learning as well. So I know Ben was going to do more of sort of an in-depth kind of presentation to kick us off, and then we're going to hand over to Ernestine, who's going to take us through her presentation. So over to you, Ben.
Well, thanks, Jake. And look, I will keep it brief, but just a quick intro to the AI Forum. So as I say, we're New Zealand's AI ecosystem organisation. So we're really here to champion and advocate for the opportunities for New Zealand from leveraging artificial intelligence technology. So where we've come from, so we're entering into our third year now. If you think back 2 to 3 years ago, a lot of the conversations around artificial intelligence focused on some of the perceived threats, some of the perceived, superintelligence, or maybe robots taking all of our jobs. On the other hand, what we were seeing was immense levels of investment happening around the world. So, in the US and in China, for example, really coordinated investment going into some of these technologies to, implement them and to roll them out into health, as we've been talking about just now, to roll them out into financial services and also for environmental applications. So pretty much any application you can think of. And so from that, that beginning, the AI Forum, we brought together a number of industry players, and so we've got a number of the global tech firms. So Microsoft, Google, IBM, for example, have been on board right from the very beginning, and then a number of New Zealand organisations, but also large companies, but also some of the really exciting AI startups that have started to come through the ecosystem over the last few years. And so really just to advocate for the applications of this technology across our economy, and then to also involve government policymakers as well in some of the economic opportunities, and also to facilitate a debate, the wider debate about the social license of these technologies as they get rolled out. And so there are really important concerns around people's privacy and data privacy, for example, and that wider question of what is the impact of automation on the future of work and the future of jobs. So, you know, we exist as a really broad-based organisation to, you know, facilitate those conversations and also to just raise the platform for New Zealand as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah. No, thank you so much for giving us that background. It's super fascinating, and there's a lot of questions I've got and things I'm keen to talk about. But we'll go on to Ernestine's presentation for now, and then we'll come back to a wider discussion afterwards. So over to you.
Cool, thanks. I've just got a little presentation. So as I mentioned, my name is Ernestine Walsh, and I am a data scientist. I specialise mainly in ethics and creating understandable solutions and basically just stuff that gets used. I work for an organisation called Nicholson Consulting. We're based in Wellington. We are a close-knit team that specialises in creating analytical solutions for our clients that are easy to understand, easy to implement, and easy for them to maintain as well. So to sum it up, basically what we do is we help our clients make the most of their data. So we have a few areas that we tend to do a lot of work in. One of them is building predictive models to automate decision making. Last year, the government released their algorithm assessment report, and this was looking at all the operational models that are out there in the public sector. And we've been involved in some shape or form with quite a few of them. We also do a lot in the training space. We are the official SAS trainers in the machine learning area for both Australia and New Zealand. And that also includes all the open source tools as well. And whenever we do a piece of work with our clients, we always encourage them to put some analysts or data scientists on the team as well. So that way they have a fun time building predictive models, they can understand the solution, they can also maintain it once we leave as well, so that's really good. And I think the last area that we do a lot in is we use something known as the Integrated Data Infrastructure, or the IDI for short. And this is a public research database. So when I say public, I mean government information, not freely available for everyone to go look at. So it contains de-identified linked data, and what that means is that you can actually look at a person's experiences across government as opposed to just a single silo. So we do a lot of research in that area. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment. We're also growing, and we're excited for where the future is heading.
Very exciting. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you know, there's a couple of things I'd love to delve into. You mentioned, you know, building predictive models to automate decision making. What are sort of the most practical examples of that right now with where the technology is at today?
So I think one of the best examples of large-scale automation in the government space would be with ACC.
Okay.
So previously, when you'd hurt yourself, you'd have to wait to get a letter in the mail, and that would take a couple of weeks. Now what we've done is we've actually automated that process. So now when you're with your health provider, they submit the information and you could potentially get a text within 7 seconds. Okay. That's the best we've seen so far.
Okay.
Saying, you know, your accident will be covered by ACC.
Wow.
So 2.1 million claims, and the majority of it is now automated.
Okay.
So all the straightforward cases done and dusted by automation. The more complicated situations, we leave that to a staff member who has the expertise to deal with them. Okay,
what's a tangible example in the private sector?
Do I want to throw it to my private sector colleagues here?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
I certainly had a question for Ernestine.
Go ahead.
Was that you have a system handling the straightforward cases and humans presumably still handling the more complex ones, and how does the decision between the two get made?
So that's up to...
Is that automated as well?
No, that one lies with the business, so that's up to how much volume they'd like to handle and their appetite for risk or benefits. So business decision.
So if someone, you know, is with their primary provider and, you know, they put in a claim at some point, and the response comes back in the 7 seconds, is something presumably is assessed whether that claim is one that can be handled automatically or whether it has to be forwarded on?
Yeah, so there's a set of business rules that run behind the scenes to check that.
So it's a rules-based technology?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And would that be based on how the input of the data that the doctor puts in at the time when entering into the system? So presumably there's like various tick boxes and so on that they check, and then that helps spit out whether it needs more specialist care or not. That's a basic way of describing it. Yeah, okay, fantastic. So I think now I've got time to head into Isaac's presentation, so over to you.
All right, thank you.
There you go.
Great, so my name's Isaac. I've got a background in marketing science. For the last 20 years, been helping organisations in different roles use data to make better decisions. And so 8 years ago, I set up Litmus Marketing, and this is a consultancy business that takes a lot of this data that's available within organisations and also external in terms of publicly available data like census data and that sort of thing, and turning that into really meaningful content that executives and C-level management can actually make key strategic decisions from. Now the thing was, we've done a lot of work across a range of industries, some pretty big players there. But we ended up with a bit of a problem about 4 years ago, where a number of our customers started to present us with some pretty knotty, untidy data. And this is typically called unstructured data. And the sort of thing we're talking about here are things like comments off stuff articles, we're talking about blog posts, survey extracts, and particularly where there's open-enders within surveys, how do you analyse that? Emails, so actually content that have been emailed into organisations. And then the social media feeds, which everyone's talking about. There's a huge amount of content in there, and so the problem was to get insights using this sort of information. Typically, you'd go down a traditional market research approach, and that was typically very slow, in that you'd need to do a whole lot of design and planning around how you're going to go and try and collect that information, and as a result, it became very, very expensive for our clients to actually try and get these insights from people around what are they thinking about a particular brand or what they're thinking about particular issues. And the big challenge too is that because it was so manual, that it was not complete. So often there was data or insight left on the table just because the traditional method wouldn't handle it. So we sort of put our thinking caps on, and that's where TechSpirit was born really. And so what TechSpirit does is we take all this raw, very, very unstructured, messy data that typically is pretty hard to work with. And we've built what we call an intelligence engine. And so this is like a brain that allows us to load all of this data in and all its untidiness, and then create structure around that. And that's where we've got a number of AI algorithms. We've built a whole lot of data proprietary processor, which is just another name for plumbing in terms of getting data to where it needs to be. And what this allows now is we can run this stuff in real time. And so what we're able to do is actually tell our clients what people are thinking, so in terms of what sort of topic areas are actually important to them. And not only that, we can then start to identify what people are actually feeling about specific topics as well. And so then turning that into content that is very digestible for a client, with dashboarding and all that sort of thing. And this can run within a cloud environment, so it's fully scalable. Anyone can use it, and really it's sort of that new wave of that perfect storm of a real data problem, but now the technology is available that we've been able to harness to really solve that.
Yeah.
And so I'll take you through a couple of examples because it's all very theoretical, isn't it?
It's so exciting, yeah.
So I think last year the Ministry of Justice went through a process of really wanting to better understand and reassess how the justice system was operating. And so they did a lot of legal work, obviously, around policy and all that sort of thing. But there was a key piece that was missing in that process, and that was around, well, what are New Zealanders actually really thinking about justice issues and what's actually keeping them up at night? And so what we're able to do is the traditional approach of going down a market research option was going to take months. They didn't have that. The process they were running through was in pretty tight timelines. And so they came to us and said, well, can we help? And we said, well, yes, we could. And so what we did is we took all these social media feeds, all this publicly available media data, they had some internal data as well that they'd collected themselves, and we loaded that through TechSpirit, and we're able to create, here's a very high level plot of the topics, and those bubbles you can see there are all the different topics that were being discussed, within the New Zealand Inc. And then we're able to actually tell what people were feeling about those topics as well, in terms of their sentiment and the emotional intensity that those topics actually had related. So that's one example. In terms of another example, we've done work for a number of private organisations. This one was Southern Cross. We're around their website, and they, typical customer experience type application where they're running a new platform, and they collected a lot of information around how people were, interacting with it, and some of the issues that they were having, and that was all captured in free text. So people were keying in, logged in, but I couldn't find my policy details, that type of thing. And we had, thousands of responses. So, unless you've got a long, long time, it's not something you really want to go and read. And so TechSpirit again went through, and we found these 8 different key themes. We could quantify them, and then we could actually pull those out as identified records, so that the builders of that system could actually get some really good first-hand feedback. So that's one example. Here's another example in the insurance sector. Typical insurance where you got a lot of claim data, a lot of free text, what actually happened. And that gets keyed in manually, and often it just sits there and doesn't really get used. And so AMI had a problem, and I think a lot of insurers are facing this in the last 5 years, where smartphone claims have been going through the roof. Very costly piece of equipment, but they weren't really sure, well, what were people actually doing to their phones? And so we took an extract from their system for just smartphones, and using TechSpirit, we're able to actually analyse it and work out and break down into actually measurable groups what people were doing. So I think there's like 13% of people were dropping their phone down the toilet, so, and then 12% running over it in their vehicle. So off that, they were able to actually build a campaign that allowed them to really try and reduce that claim cost by using these insights as a real marketing outbound campaign. So there are just a few examples, very different. So one's looking external, bringing all this information in to understand what people are doing out there. Then we can use from a customer voice of the customer perspective, but then operational data like we've just seen with the AMI work.
That's fascinating.
So really it comes down to the customers we're working with are what we'd call innovators. Really wanting to push the boundaries, not happy doing what they've done for the last 10 or 20 years. And this is really where AI is playing now, is it's allowing us to do things that we weren't able to do before. Absolutely. And solve problems that traditionally was solved in a pretty arduous way. And I think that's really where the traction we've seen is actually be able to meet the technology with the problem. And that's what our customers are really valuing from what we're doing.
Cool. Yeah, congratulations on everything. I mean, it's so inspiring to see all these practical applications of how it actually works. So thank you for sharing your story. And I want to pick up on a comment that I think, Tony, you might have made a bit earlier. You said, or maybe it was Ben that mentioned that there's been a lot of sort of rhetoric around some of the fear associated with AI, and I do want to talk a little bit more of that and get your sort of counter perspectives to some of that, because I think it was Bill Gates who said that we often overestimate the effect technology will have in the short term, but underestimate it in the long term. So what do you think are going to be the next, or sort of like the most tangible effects that AI will have on the lives of everyday humans over the next, say, 10 years?
I mean, I think if we pull back and actually, one of the challenges right now is defining artificial intelligence, right? Because it's a moving feast, and in some ways, back in the 1960s, pocket calculator was artificial intelligence, and so there's often a comment that AI is actually what computers can't do yet, in some ways, and so we've 20 years ago, playing chess, for example, was AI, and now we fully expect computers to beat us at chess, to beat us at Go, and so. What we tend to break it down to is the underlying technologies, and there's a spectrum from statistics through data science through to machine learning, and that's really the state of the art for AI now. And then, what can you actually do with that? So we've heard some, just some examples now. Interesting, focusing on the insurance sector, the case studies, and so that's a sector that really is very data rich. And has a lot of historical data. And actually one of the AI Forum's members, ANZ Bank, their Australian parent just recently, their half-year results, they released billions of dollars of profit, but in their earnings announcement, they were saying, attributing their investments in machine learning and robotic process automation, which is a subset of AI, to really contributing towards those results as well. So that's actually something we've been waiting to see in region, is really to start seeing mentions of AI and mentions of machine learning in earnings calls, just to actually show the return on investment. But anyway, so going back to the practical uses, I think we generally break it down into 3 or 4 main categories. So as I say, robotic process automation, this is the way to automate, reasonably complex business processes that often involve a person to manually fill in lots and lots of forms. So you can use a software robot now to automate a lot of those processes and do that intelligently, so it learns to optimize that process as it goes forward. Machine vision, and so this is the ability for computers to see. And so we're seeing all sorts of applications right through from number plate recognition, counting cars on the road, facial recognition at airports, and even payments, for example, using facial recognition. And it might be worth going to some of those social license issues around facial recognition and surveillance, for example, because as this technology rolls out, it does have implications on society.
Absolutely.
So other than machine vision, and then we often see natural language processing, the ability for computers to understand natural language as we're talking now and actually speak back to us, and that may be through a simple chatbot interface typed in,
like
or actually
the
most advanced companies like FaceMe and Soul Machines now doing face-to-face avatars. And then I think you were asking what's a private sector example of predictions and recommendations. Well, the classic example is Netflix. So when I log on to Netflix and I'm presented, instead of having to navigate my way through the tens of thousands of pieces of content that's there's some recommendations there that are auto-generated, and that's based on the viewing habits of all the people that have viewed Netflix around the world, and it's sort of pigeonholed me into a category that likes sort of dark thrillers or something.
Yes.
And there they are lifted, and I don't have to go through lots of children's movies, for example. So there's just some examples of the main categories as they're emerging.
A dark thriller is what you see when you go into Netflix.
Critically acclaimed dark dramas, I think, is actually the category.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And Tony, where do you see, obviously working closely with the private sector in this space, where do you see the greatest opportunities for smart entrepreneurs to create and build valuable companies in AI today?
Well, perhaps it kind of comes back to why I was so quick off the mark to ask Ernestine the question a minute ago about how the ACC system drew the line between cases that would be, safely amenable to a machine learning approach, a predictive approach, and ones that weren't. And the answer was that there was a rules engine effectively doing that. And after a long period working in chemometrics, building machine learning models deployed in the cloud, running testing laboratories of Europe and the US, I started looking around for other opportunities to use machine learning. What became quickly apparent is that you rapidly get into an area where there's, if you like, knowledge or kind of logical inference involved rather than statistical inference. In that case, a rules engine has to say, well, based on A being true and B being true, then we will allow this claim to go for processing, or no, we won't. And so there's a whole interface with it comes back almost to what used to be called good old-fashioned AI, what they did back in the days of expert systems. And at the end of the day, a machine vision system can recognise an object as a car, but if it doesn't know what a car is and what a car does, and it's strictly limited in where the system can go from there. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to, now we're starting to get, pretty capable at straightforward machine learning. There are a lot of opportunities now to take it to the next step, which is to interface back to sort of knowledge systems. And that's my particular interest at the moment. Okay. It comes in very much in a field like automated discovery in scientific literature, where they're talking about things all the time, and you kind of have to know what these things are,
Yeah.
I think that's a key piece of understanding around what AI actually is as well, where you can have the technology, you can get the machine learning piece actually running, but it comes down to how well that thing can learn. And that's something we've learned, over the last 3 or 4 years. We've started, and the one way I describe it is it's a bit like having a child. So 4 years ago, TechSpirit was born. I said earlier, but now it's a 4-year-old, and so we've been running it on over 200 different large big data sets. We've been running in different industries, and each time it gets exposed to something, it learns something new. And partly how we can incorporate and help speed that up is actually having that tool built in a way where it can be reconfigured and can keep learning. And so a lot of what we've got, dictionaries behind there. We've just recently built a module for Te Reo, so we can actually read that and interpret that in the correct way. Because we got some data from Office of the Children's Commissioner that had a lot of Te Reo in it, and it didn't know how to handle that. And so and this is what we're continually doing, and I think it's not just like, you just download a quick one off Google or from Microsoft. That'll get you started, but it's actually that journey that you go on with the technology in terms of how the thing actually grows into a 4-year-old. And that's been the real learning we've had over the last few years.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of smart companies all around the world, both here in New Zealand and obviously the big beasts like Google and Microsoft and IBM's of plenty of smart people and sort of working on this problem, or this, not problem, but this opportunity, it might be a better word. In terms of how governments are thinking about it, like, is it time we need like a Ministry of Artificial Intelligence? Like, what should be the way the government should be interacting with this? It might be a stupid question, but I'm keen to get your perspectives on that.
So I don't think we needed a Ministry of Artificial Intelligence. There is a precedence. In the United Arab Emirates, they have a Minister for AI.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and look, as I said, when we've looked around the world, we did our research report last year, Shaping a Future New Zealand, which really did look at the international AI strategies from countries around the world. So, for example, Canada, the UK, Singapore, not to mention China and now the US do have national strategies around AI, and New Zealand at the moment doesn't. I think from the tech sector, there's a degree of a disappointment that the CTA process that was advertised last year didn't actually result in an appointment, and that work has sort of hung in the balance a little bit since then. I think that, we're optimistic there's going to be more momentum. Look, I think it pulls right up to, and I think you were chatting with Graham Muller about this yesterday, Jake, but it pulls right up to the fact that technology and AI is part of this, is really impacting and changing the world that we're living in and our economy. And so for government to play a part in this, we really need to have a coordinated technology policy engine, I think, across government. So whether that's a Ministry of the Future or a Ministry of AI, I don't know if structurally how they would do it, but certainly some kind of horizontal coordination function across government, so that the pockets of innovation, and there's some really good work going on across government from what I've been observing. To just have that overall policy coordination across the top, I think would be a good step.
I think it's a great idea, yeah. And we spoke a little bit about some of the risks or the perceived risks, and I think I asked Graham a similar question yesterday, but when Elon Musk says that the biggest risk that we face as a civilization is AI, is he wrong?
I think we've still got humans, haven't we?
Yeah.
Anyone want to have a go at that?
I guess if and when the day comes when the control of nuclear codes and things like that's handed over to AI, well, maybe it'll be our biggest risk.
Is there anything? Sorry.
There is a really present discussion that really points towards an answer to that question. And so a few weeks ago, I was at a select committee hearing on the topic of lethal autonomous weapon systems. So these are killer robots, if you like. And so Mary Wareham, who works for Human Rights Watch in Washington, but is actually a Kiwi originally, leads that global campaign. And really, that question of having meaningful human control over systems, over lethal weapons, so effectively ceding the right to make a decision on whether to kill or not in a war scenario, is a major so ethical question and legal question that we have at the moment. And so I think that really points us towards that discussion around potential superintelligence is where does the human control begin and end? And so I think personally, I think it's a long way through to potential superintelligence, if ever. And personally, I think that the opportunities from us to augment ourselves with these technologies and to co-evolve with them, I think, present the pathway towards answering some of those questions as well.
Okay, and for over 100 years, technology's been replacing the need for human muscle, and AI, in many ways will replace the need for human intelligence, as we know, is what it is. At what point do you think we will see that having some really tangible effects on the labour market?
It probably is already, I think.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, with Industry 4 and what is this new era that we're moving into, and each industry revolution has had a massive change on the labour market.
Yeah.
There'll be no difference here, but then there's going to be a massive industry built that wasn't there before either.
Right.
So if it takes and it gives.
Yeah. If you were talking to people watching this from all ages and stages of their life, particularly for young people, what advice would you give them about preparing for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's about having a vision yourself of where you see yourself. There's still opportunities that we don't even know what they are yet.
Yeah.
But like I can only refer to my experiences. Back 20 years ago, having that inclination that there was going to be an overlap between consumer behaviour, IT, and statistics, and sort of positioning into that. And I think, like if you're talking about careers and that, I don't think they're going to be so regimental. I think in that last session, the health sector, there's a comment made there that actually having people that've got the clinical background as well as the technology is actually where there's massive opportunity.
Exactly.
And I think in the future it's going to be how do you blend skills, and then in that you'll create a niche within whatever the sphere ends up being.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about like AI having intelligence, but I've heard a lot of people say like it will never replace like human emotion and kind of the ability to emotion, and also kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, intuition at certain times in complex situations. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I was reading a really interesting article just a couple of days ago, and it totally escapes me now where I was reading it and what it was about, but it was researchers who were teaching an AI system to fear. Because this related to autonomous driving, because driving a car, which is actually a lethal weapon in itself, especially in Christchurch, fear is actually a significant under-the-scenes component that can or should be involved in how you control that vehicle. And so they were quite deliberately trying to generate data sets that would enable them to add a level of training to one of these systems that would have it at least predict when it should be fearful and then do something appropriate.
Okay, fascinating. Yeah.
So it's not the same as emotion, but you can train in a kind of surrogate for it.
Yeah.
And so,
No, thanks for that perspective. And when it comes to education, Ernestine, like obviously as a data scientist, do you, in your organisation and in other organisations you're working with, are there enough smart people coming through in the country that have these skills to actually start making change in this area, or do you think we have a long way to go in that space? Anyone can have a crack at this as well.
I think a lot of the times what you find is there is this pinnacle unicorn type data scientist, and they're like, oh, no, they don't have expertise in computer vision. We can't hire them, even though we don't do anything about computer vision at all. We just can't have them. So I think just a bit more flexibility, because there are so many people out there with skills that could easily transfer into data science. So just looking at, other people, do they have potential? Could we train them up?
Yeah.
I think just having a broader perspective on what data science can be and who can do it would go a long way.
Okay, Tony, I saw you had some thoughts on that one.
I was thinking back a moment ago to what Isaac was saying in relation to, what he would tell young people. And, for a very long time it's seemed apparent to me that there just needs to be, I would be advising young people to, even if you absolutely hate it, study maths at school as long and hard as you can, because it underpins just about all technology.
said that though, there are other areas to get into as well if
Sure.
you're like, oh, maths is a bit too hard or something like that. You know, we were talking about the privacy and ethics side of things before. You know, there are other softer elements that people could also get into to be part of the area.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even sort of the most basic mathematical understanding still helps you to look at ethical situations in at least a kind of rational way, I think, as opposed to a sort of irrational fear of the unknown.
Is the way that maths is sort of taught in our schools right now, do you think that students have got a clear line of sight to how those skills will be useful later in life?
It's pretty challenging, I think. And I think it's partly around, always been quite surprised in schools, what the career advice department really is.
Yeah.
And it might have worked quite well 50 years ago, but the world's a very different place out there now. And I think you're back to my earlier comment, that blending of disciplines, I think, is really where the world exists now. And it means there's almost an infinite combination of what you could actually specialise in.
100%. So
and in terms of the maths thing, I'd completely reinforce that. The other thing we notice, particularly around where you're trying to create insights, is that it becomes this sort of merging of science and art in terms of applying stuff. Needs that interpretation, the ability to go, what is this organisation really trying to achieve here?
Yes.
How does this underpin their strategy? But then bring in the analytics and the tech in a way that actually really does mesh well.
You've always still got to be able to formulate the right questions,
That's right.
don't you?
Yeah.
That's right.
If you ask the wrong questions, you're wasting your time.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter, you could have a room full of mathematicians, but unless it can be applied, there's not going to be any value, and the organisation's going to not actually be better off.
Great.
So it's sort of having that balance, and that's the hard thing.
And I think that might go to the heart of your question about, super intelligent AI in the future. It's like that human intuition piece. That's going to be, very difficult to replicate in software, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gentlemen, Ernestine, thank you so much for taking the time. The last question I want to ask is really just if there's one sort of, practical applicable, if there's one problem in the world that you believe AI is really going to solve, that's a major problem that exists now over the next 10, 20, 30 years, what is the problem that you're all individually most excited about seeing AI combat in the world? And before I ask you for that answer, I just want to thank the viewers for tuning in. Thank you so much for coming here again to watch us here on Techweek TV. We really appreciate you tuning in from around the country. We've got many more exciting sessions coming to you from Christchurch throughout the day, and special thank you as well to Callahan Innovation for hosting us here today, and to Ben, Tony, Isaac and Ernestine for being here. So we'll kick the last question off, just giving these guys an opportunity to have a think about it with Ben.
So AI and machine learning are sort of general purpose technologies applicable across all sorts of domains. Personally, I think the opportunity to apply it to some of the big environmental challenges that we have now, and to begin using some of the new, for example, satellite Earth observation data that's starting to stream online now. I think we can use that to really more closely understand the ecosystems and the changes to the ecosystems that are happening, and and maybe apply some of those learnings to conservation outcomes.
Absolutely, Ben, thank you. What about you, Tony?
Well, I find that a really hard question, actually. I'm sort of wildly excited about all of it, so I'll let these guys talk to this one.
Yes, no worries.
Yeah, I think for me it's around the speed of learning.
Okay.
And so, like to Ben, we can point it at lots of different directions, but that's really where the traction we've had has been around actually creating something in real time.
Absolutely.
And it's just in one tiny little niche area.
Yeah.
But it's how that can be replicated into solving some of the real big issues as well.
For
and it's
sure.
about that speed of it doesn't
Yes.
now take years to do something. We can actually tell you in seconds.
Yeah, it's a great answer.
I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. What about you, Ernestine?
Well, I think Ben picked the environment, so maybe I'll go with healthcare. I think it's such a big area. You could have, for instance, looking at computer vision, better ways to detect and diagnose illnesses. But then right at the other end of the spectrum, you could have automation. You could look at some of the work, say, that Lance O'Sullivan and others are doing, particularly for communities where there aren't doctors readily available. Just having, an alternative so that they can easily access healthcare, I think will really make a difference.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Thanks for taking the time. It's been a
Thanks,
huge
Reid.
pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks
you.
very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.